Thank you very much, dear friends. We're very glad to see all of you here. My name is Fyodor Wojtolowski. I'm Director of Institute of World Economy and International Relations of Russian Academy of Sciences. And today's session is devoted to new security threats. And it has second definition, terrorism and information in the digital age. We have fantastic speakers today. We have Dmitry Trenin, who is a research professor at Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs of Higher School of Economics, and also a leading research fellow at Institute of World Economy and International Relations of Russian Academy of Sciences. We have Bharati Hiremat, head and founder, coordinator of Department of International Relations of University of Missouri. We have Dr. Kai Kui-chong, professor at the Center for American Studies at Fudan University. We have Dr. Moses Khanil, director of the Center for Military Studies, University of Stellenbosch. And we have Professor Anatol Livin, director of the Eurasia program of Queen Institute for Responsible Statecraft. So today we are going to speak about the topic which I think is concerning everybody in this world. Unfortunately, the level of international terrorism, even taking into account such regions which have been mostly dominated by terrorist activity in previous decade, have like Middle East are having significant decline in the activity of international terrorism. The world we are living is facing new forms of international terrorism. We are seeing the transnational terrorist activity in different countries of the world. We see networks. We see ideological and political radicalism and religious and ideological radicalism turning into not only into political movements, but also in terrorist attacks and brutal violence against civilians and against states and governments, but not only. The main feature of contemporary terrorism is the fact that a lot of common people, a lot of civilians are suffering from terrorist activity and terrorist attacks. A lot of things have changed with emergence of international communication facilities, including social media, including internet, and also its elements which are mostly known as darknet and other instruments which are giving an opportunity for terrorist groups to work internationally, to have their networks, to organize their activity with frameworks they can design using these social media instruments. Also, they're actively using social media information resources and communication resources for presenting their positions, their visions, for threatening, for bringing their ideology to the masses, and trying to also to engage more and more people, especially but not only especially in poorest countries and underdeveloped countries, but all around the world in different diasporas and different groups in many societies, including leading economies. They are also using not only social media, but elements of artificial intelligence. And I think that these tendencies can be very dangerous, not only for cyber security and for cyber attacks, but also for attacks against, in terms of attacks on critical infrastructure and international communication resources, but also it can give opportunity for anonymizing terrorist activity, but bringing its political and information results much more significant than previous we have seen during previous decades. The phenomena of terrorism, which emerged from 19th century and mostly have been much more individual, today is becoming focused on mass effects and on mass destruction. One of the biggest threats in this sense is the usage of weapons of mass destruction by terrorist groups. So today we're going to discuss all these trends, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Dmitry Trenin to start this discussion. Please, Professor Trenin.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Wojciechowski. Thank you for giving me the floor. And I would apologize from the start by saying I will probably not talk about terrorism or the digital age. I think we should see the elephant in this room as far as security is concerned. And the elephant is not a bunch of terrorists. The real elephant that threatens international security already has threatened international security and destroyed it in several regions of the world is the confrontation among the major powers and the passage that's begun from, let's call it the hegemonic age, to a different world order. And I think this is the relevant issue for BRICS, because the alternative to the existing hegemonical order is not and cannot and should not be chaos. It should be a new world order. And the contours of that new world order can already be seen. And let me just point out a few of them. The emerging world order is going to be non-hegemonic. The United States, unlike all its predecessors, as the dominant world power, will not have a successor. The world will not be ruled again by another major power, or a combination of 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 major powers. This will be a totally new international system. That's what's emerging. That international system will not be based on blocs and diktat disguised as alliances in the name of some ideology. It will be based on agreements, on give and take, on various treaties and other accords. The New World Order will be, the elements of the New World Order will be states and their organizations and civilizations, even in some ways. If you take, let's say, the value system of the world, then civilizations will be front and center. And of course, there'll be a polycentric. I don't like the word multipolar very much because my physics teacher told me that there can be only 2 poles in the world, which aligned with the way the world was structured when I was a kid and when I went to school. It's going to be polycentric, and those centers in different areas, in different functional areas or geographical areas, may not coincide. Some small country or relatively small country can be one of the leading members in a certain function or in a certain region. And my conclusion from this first point, and I only have 4. I know I have 10 minutes, not more. So my conclusion is that the building site for this project, the building of elements of the New World Order, is BRICS. And I think we should take BRICS very much as that building site and use it for that purpose. In the sphere of international security, I see a lot of work cut out for BRICS members. We still live in a world that, in terms of international security, is based on the notions and principles that were formulated elsewhere, outside of the BRICS group. And again, any student of international relations or political science understands that all those nice terms and the so-called scientific principles, in fact, are very closely tied to the country and the system where they were first advanced and where they were first adopted. So I think it's up to us in the BRICS group to think seriously about the meaning of such terms as strategic stability, deterrence, arms control, confidence-building measures, non-proliferation or proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I think we should engage with one another in a very serious dialogue, first at the expert level about these things. And we need to think about new models of relations between and among countries. I think that relations between such major powers as China, India, and Russia merit a lot of attention with regard to devising the principles of new principles of international relations that can be used as models for other nations. So new philosophy, new language, new conceptual foundation, that is what I think should be on our agenda. My third point is that at the continental level, Eurasia, a lot of countries that are members of BRICS are also members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There must be, in my view, much more harmonization between what we're doing at BRICS and what we're doing at SCO. And the task in front of us is turning Eurasia, initially without its western peninsula, unfortunately, into an area of security, cooperation, prosperity, mutual trust. This is up to us. And I think this is something that BRICS as well as SCO must be very, very much engaged in. If you zoom into certain areas in Eurasia, there's again, a number of issues that need to be tackled. At the regional level, just to give you one example, which is particularly relevant with the entry of countries such as Iran and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia also, and Egypt into the BRICS group. We need to follow up on the initiatives undertaken by Russia and China, the very big interest that India expresses in that region, to shore up security in the Persian/Arabian Gulf area. And that, I think, is very, very important. And my last point will be relations with the West. I think that BRICS group is very focused on building a new world order that will be free from domination by the United States or the collective West. But this doesn't mean that we sever relations with Western countries. It's just the other way around. It's Western countries that are severing relations with Russia. But eventually, if you take a long view, say 10 years, 15 years, and I think we should take a long view on those things, various nations that are part of the West or part of the US system of alliances can be brought into closer contact, closer engagement with BRICS countries. I'm thinking of countries such as Turkey. I'm thinking of such countries as Japan, France, and some others. If at some point, maybe that will be beyond my time, not here on the panel clearly, but my time as a living thing, if at some point well into the future, Europe as an autonomous international actor emerges, Europe can join Eurasia, which will be a truly significant achievement for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Trenin, for putting the issue of new security threats and international terrorist activity into a broader context of transformations of the world order. I think that you have been putting it in a very right way, but your main assumption is based on the hypothesis that the international system is becoming more polycentric than the current one, but at the same time, I can add that it can become also a new bipolar system, and combining elements of polycentricity and new bipolarity. And in this sense, your main thesis about the divergence, which divides much more than the world, much more than in previous decades, gives no hope for the dialogue on international terrorism. Because when 9/11 has happened, Russian Federation and the United States started immediate consultations, and the working group led by two generals, Vyacheslav Trubnikov and General Armitage on the American side, have started to exchange information on international terrorist activity in few days after the terrorist attack in New York and in Washington. And nowadays we cannot imagine not even such consultations and the exchange of information, but we can see that China, the United States, Russia, and many others, BRICS countries, are having different definitions of international terrorism, and different lists of organizations belonging to international terrorist community and having international terrorist activity. So I'm very glad to give the floor to Professor Bharati Hiremat. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for introducing me. As he introduced, I am from University of Mysore, Dr. Bharati Hiremat, founder coordinator of Department of International Relations. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege to be a part of 16th BRICS Academic Forum. I must thank the organizers for organizing this wonderful academic forum. Considering one of the key pillars of Russian chairship, that is politics and security, I would like to focus on major new security challenges faced by globally. According to an IBM report 2023, Asia Pacific region was the most targeted by cyber attacks, representing 31% of all reported incidents, with Europe and North America following 28% and 25% respectively. Cyberspace is vulnerable to a wide variety of incidents, whether intentional or accidental, man-made or natural, and the data exchange in the cyberspace can be exploited for nefarious purposes by both nation states and non-state actors. If you glance at the statistics on industry-specific cybersecurity, in healthcare industry, there has been a 239% increase in the number of large breaches involving hacking over the last 4 years. In the field of education, 29% of attacks on educational institutions originated from vulnerability exploitation and 30% from phishing campaigns on schools in 2023. In the same way, in the finance and manufacturing sector, central banks around the globe are considering throwing their weight behind digital currencies and modernizing payment systems. This transformation makes the system vulnerable to cyber attacks. Malicious actors are taking advantage of this digital transformation and pose a growing threat to the global financial system, financial stability, and confidence in the integrity of the system. In 2022, manufacturing accounted for 65% industrial ransomware incidents, and supply chain attacks increased by 600% in 2022. Without dedicated action, the global financial system will only become more vulnerable as innovation and competition further fuel the digital revolution. When it comes to the India stand, India is very firm on zero tolerance towards terrorism in all forms. In recent times, India has launched a series of cyber security initiatives of digitally empower its citizens and safeguard cyberspace. India has taken initiatives so much online training of government personnel of union ministers, departments in cyber security and cyber Surakshit Bharat training program to create awareness among corporates and institutions. India reiterates the need of a comprehensive and balanced approach to ICT's development and security, including technical advancement, business development of safeguarding the security of states and public interests. Without taking much time, I have some recommendations. Move on to recommendations. As there is increasing responsibility of BRICS, it should act as a bridge between global south and global north so that we can unitedly fight against cyber threat. In this context, I have, as I told you, few recommendations. At first, universities, educational institutions of BRICS member states should necessarily organize regular discussions, conferences, academic forums, like so that we can create awareness about the security threats among the young scholars. Second, there is an immediate need for promotion of research and development in cyber security. The cyber skills and talent shortage is widening at an alarming rate. 52% of public organizations state that a lack of resources and skills is their biggest challenge when designing for cyber resilience. It is need to set up centers of excellence in areas of strategic importance for the point of security of cyberspace. Again, it's very necessary to encourage solution-oriented research and collaborations between academia and industry among BRICS states. Capacity building through training, awareness programs, and creation of a mechanism of cooperation at the domestic and international levels is also very required. It is very necessary to have a multilateral collaborations among engineering, government and private institutions at regional, national and international level to combat all sorts of threats. Here, moving on to, a roadmap for such cooperation should include stakeholders from government to the private sector, academia, technical communities, and civil societies, and regular, institutional dialogues to help develop common understanding on critical issues. It is very essential to build a better cyber ecosystem and strengthening the regulatory framework. Collaboration among organizations, suppliers, and regulatory bodies is an essential factor for building more secure cyber environment. I would like to conclude my words hoping that BRICS 2024 will come out with a fruitful outcomes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Terrorism. I think you have, please.
Yes, yes. Shall I?
Yeah, you can leave it here. Not a problem. I think that you have touched a very significant aspect of international security, interconnected with not only with cyber crimes and cyber terrorism, but also with effects which digitalization is having on international security. And I think that here we are in a very controversial situation because national and transnational is becoming so interconnected that any regulatory practices you have mentioned are facing the risk that governments could try to manage their cybersecurity activity, including cyber operations, as non-state actors. And non-state actors can pretend that they are belonging to the statehood and operating under the auspices of some state. The paradox of this situation is that each of us, I think, in current digitalized world are facing the threat of criminal activity with usage of cyber instruments. And also all of us are seeing a lot of ideological radicalism on the internet and usage of digital instruments for attacks against critical infrastructure. During the conflict in Ukraine, for example, Russia has many times faced cyber attacks in different forms, including attacks on civilian objects, civilian infrastructure, schools, hospitals, scientific institutions, and universities. And I think that millions of Russians have been suffered from terrorist attacks with usage of different financial digital instruments. I think that here we can find also all of us, all BRICS countries, in a very complicated situation because technologies are developing, digitalization is going on, but at the same time, only BRICS countries among each other can use some agreements and some regulatory instruments to define what is cyber activity, criminal activity, what is cyber terrorism, how we can work with it, how we can manage with such exams. But at the same time, it requires broader international cooperation and attention. I'm very glad to give the floor to Professor Tsai-Kun Chong from Center for American Studies at Fudan University. Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a great pleasure to be here in Moscow in this special time, and this is my second time in this city, great city. This session is named after new security threats, and I would like to put it in as a cybersecurity cooperation necessity within BRICS. So I would like to talk about 4 aspects. First is about the necessity, second about the foundation of this cybersecurity cooperation, and thirdly about the challenges, and lastly about several of my suggestions. So first about the necessity, it's really, and cybersecurity, I think it's the most practical area of cooperation, and can be said it's the foundations of the BRICS existence and the enhancing international voice and influence in the future, especially after the expansion of the BRICS. So after the expansion of from BRICS 5 to BRICS 10, or even then to the expanding BRICS, the BRICS now cover more regions, including Asia, Africa, Middle East. So there is a urgent need for new impotence to continue advancing cooperation. So cybersecurity, I think it's a kind of a greatest common denominator in areas of mutual cooperation. So this is the most feasible areas for cooperation. And this is the first point. And the second, we are all facing some common cybersecurity threats. And we know that among BRICS nations, we have some 3 basic or key areas of cybersecurity. One is the weak information infrastructure. And so in recent years, we see that critical information infrastructure of BRICS countries, including finance, electricity, transportation, and energy, has been the primary targets of cyber attacks. And then we see a lot of cyber crime. The rampant cyber crime is widespread and increasingly problematic, and causing a lot of problems. And we see that cyber terrorism as one of the key questions in this session. And we know that BRICS country, according to the National Cybersecurity Index and also the Global Cybersecurity Index and also the Cybersecurity Exposure Index, we see that except for Saudi Arabia, Russia, India, Egypt, and Ethiopia, I mean, other countries, BRICS countries, generally face the issue of cyber security levels lagging behind the digital development. So we see attacks on critical infrastructure. For example, in Brazil in 2020, national health system suffered a very severe attack, and we see a lot of cybercrime. For example, in South Africa in 2021, the South Africa's port system was hit by an attack, and cyber terrorism for Saudi Arabia, also for Egypt, frequently face cyber threats, and also we see fake news and information manipulation. For example, in Brazil, in 2018, the presidential elections, fake news was widely spread, and also in India, some incidents of social violence triggered by fake news, and then we see other issues as data privacy and protection. For example, in 2020, China, more than 2 billion pieces of personal information belonging to the citizens, including names, phones, numbers, ID numbers, was sold on the black market, and we see attacks to supply chain. So this is the necessity. And secondly, I see that we have a lot of foundations within BRICS system. I would like to say we have 3 foundations. The first is the user groups. So from the perspective from the users, in terms of the number of internet users, China and India has surpassed the United States, so ranking the first and second globally. So we have the biggest, the user or even the digital market basis, and this is the first one, user basis, and then the political basis. Secondly, we see a lot of leaders' summits and declarations have declared that declared about the importance of combating cybercrime, combating also achieving ICT in security. And we see a lot of declarations like UFA Declaration, Goa Declaration, Xiamen Declaration, all declare that the focus on the cybersecurity, and also, a lot more. 2019 Brasilia Declaration, etc. And this is the political, and politically we see that the BRICS country all support the UN in playing a leading role in constructive dialogue, and this is the political foundation. And then most importantly, I think that BRICS already has the third foundation, that is the institutional foundation. So we see that, for example, we have already BRICS Cybersecurity Working Group, the BRICS ICT Security Expert Working Group, and a lot more. So we see some already existing normative regulations and frameworks among BRICS states. For example, the BRICS Information Security Cooperation Agreement, which is signed in 2015, and we have Digital Economy Cooperation Agreement, which is signed in 2019, and we see a lot more normative regulations that BRICS states are promoting. For example, the United Data Protection Regulation, Cybersecurity Standards, Internet Governance and Sovereignty, and about cybercrime, terrorism, and also digital inclusivity and bridging the digital divide, and also some special efforts such as what I mentioned as a BRICS working group on ICT cooperation. And BRICS already have the cyber threat intelligence sharing platform, which was set up in 2017, and actually by 2019 already prevented dozens of cyber attacks. And BRICS have already have some joint cybersecurity exercises and drills, and BRICS Cyber Governance Action Plan, and some international advocacy and participation. And as well as some research and development collaboration. So a lot more we can see with the United Nations, for example, United Nations Counterterrorism Committee and United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, etc. So these are second about the foundation. And third, we see a lot more, we have to admit that we have a lot of challenges in cybersecurity cooperation among BRICS countries because firstly, we have different priorities among different countries. For example, in terms of countering cyber terrorism, the degree to which cyber countries are threatened by terrorism really varies. So their enthusiasm and focus on governing cyber terrorism differs because of that. And also, secondly, we see a lot of internal resistance. For example, geopolitical tensions, for example, like Iran, its geopolitical dynamics and its relations with other countries. This is a geopolitical tension and internal political differences and economic disparities because we understand that different economic development level among BRICS countries, and also cultural and linguistic barriers. And all these BRICS countries, we speak, although we are speaking or in English in this panel, but I believe that a lot more languages are used among BRICS countries. And then thirdly, we see digital divide and different infrastructure gaps, and also varied capabilities in cyber security readiness because of a different technological development. And then fourthly, lastly, I think that we see a lot of inconsistency in international positions or standards. For example, Brazil has joined the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, but other BRICS countries such as China and Russia have not, so resulting in some legal barriers or there's other, inconsistencies and standards, technologically even. So this is my third point. And lastly, about some suggestions how to promote this cybersecurity collaboration among BRICS country. I think I just roughly mentioned the 6 points. The first is about establishing a unified stance. I think it's really very important to have a common cybersecurity perspective or building. This is the foundation for the security collaboration, I think, the unified stance. And secondly, I think that we have to innovate the cooperation mechanism, institutions, and also integrate the already existing mechanisms. As I mentioned, we have already a lot of institutions and mechanisms in cybersecurity, collaboration in cyber terrorism, and we have to integrate, and we can even innovate. And thirdly, I think so we have to promote policy coordination and standardization, and promote the formulation of international for example, anti-cyber terrorism treaties, something like that. And then thirdly, advocating in international forums, for example, with IGF, Internet Governance Forum, and with the UN platform. And fourthly, collaborating with other international bodies, for example, G20, OECD, etc. And fifth, I think it's very important to have some technical and judicial cooperation against cyber crime and cyber terrorism. And this is very technical and practical collaboration. And I think lastly, we have to engage in capacity building and knowledge sharing to improve overall cyber defense, promote technology innovation, resource sharing, threat intelligence sharing, transnational combating transnational cybercrime, and so as improve digital economy development, etc. So yeah, this is my 4 aspects of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Tsai, for bringing our discussion into a very practical way and showing us how a cooperation under the auspices of BRICS on cybersecurity threats can be interconnected and developing together with activity we're having on the United Nations organization level and in other formats. I can also add that it is very significant that China, India, Russia are actively cooperating against the usage of cyber instruments for money laundering and sponsorship of international terrorism in the FATF Eurasian group. And it also can be added to the activities you have described in your brilliant presentation. I would like to ask our speakers to take their seats in the first row, and I would like to invite 2 more outstanding speakers for today's session. Professor Moses Haniel, who is director of Center for Military Studies at the University of Stellenbosch. Please take your seat. Yeah, and I'm also glad to invite Professor Anatol Livin, who is director of the Eurasia program of Queen Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Я вас зря согнал. Please. Just a minute. Professor Kanil, please. Africa has become one of, most active regions in which terrorist activity is growing more fastly than in any other regions of the world. Please, the floor is yours. Yes.
Thanks, Program Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure and honor to be here to say a few words on this very important topic. My assignment is very easy. Actually, the previous speakers have already made it so easy for me because I will basically be summarizing what they've already said. If I can just get indication on how to move. Is it on the screen?
I think that they have some device. Should be this.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So what I want to do basically is just to summarize, to make some introductory remarks, then move on to contextualize what I call non-traditional threats within the BRICS framework, most of which, as I already said, have been covered, and then some considerations that we might want to look into as we move forward. Now, the issue of non-traditional security threats, as was introduced by the current Secretary General of the UN in the Security Council about 3 years or so ago, is very important in the sense that it seeks to distinguish between that which has been adopted as traditional threats for a very long time, especially defining the Cold War environment, to that which is now called non-traditional threats as we know them today. And he captured it very nicely. And it's echoed by most of the authors that you might be aware of, that it is about those challenges, those aspects that are kind of threaten the well-being of states and people around the world, and these are largely not so much military in origin. They are not so much military in origin. And they include most of the issues that we have covered today, ranging from energy supply, climate change, cybersecurity, infectious diseases, and illicit transfer of funds. We know what happened during COVID, how many people died, but the kind of discrimination and apartheid system that was implemented in terms of the vaccine distribution, the vaccine development, and all those issues. Now, if you had money and you were coming from the north, well, we heard today that Russia is the most northern country, and so on. But if all what we saw during that time, these so-called non-traditional threats defined the kind of relationship that exists in the current international order. And the distinction between traditional and non-traditional threats is both for academic purposes, but increasingly for practical purposes. Because in the past, issues of water, food, borders, those were hardcore traditional matters that took countries to war. But now, not so much. New types of threats are emerging, and they are coexisting with these non-traditional threats. And one important feature here is that these NTS threats, or non-traditional threats, you can have the biggest, the most powerful military on the planet, but it's not going to be so much useful. And these are also borderless. They defy the kind of borders that you might be having. You might be having the highest walls, the biggest walls, but these threats will always defy those. Now, as this panel is dealing with terrorism, these threats are being exploited to the full extent by terrorist organizations. To the fullest extent, the kind of resources that traditional states have in at their disposal is equally available and exploited by the terrorist organizations. The program director has highlighted the importance of the fact that state actors and non-state actors are just as capable and are involved in dealing with these or perpetrating issues of non-traditional threats. Now, I have indicated that there's a whole range of these threats, but I felt maybe let's highlight one that is very current. One that is very current, the digital arms race that we're experiencing today. We've just heard now from Professor Kai what is happening, what BRICS is doing in the area of cyber threats and so on. But ladies and gentlemen, artificial intelligence is here and is either going to build or is going to destroy. Now, BRICS needs to be ready for both in equal measure, because there's so much value inherent in artificial intelligence, but so much is danger also inherent there. As things stand, artificial intelligence, this arms race, global arms race, which is characterized by artificial intelligence, has led some countries, I suspect you already know which ones, to defy international trade rules as we know them within the World Trade Organization and so forth. We have spoken so much about the international security and the global order as by Professor Dimitri here. That is very much central to what is happening today and as we move forward. The digital divide is getting wider and wider, much more pronounced because of artificial intelligence. If you are not part of it, of your own volition, you will be part of it on the receiving end. So there is increased vulnerability for all countries in terms of cybersecurity, both to deal with it or to perpetrate it. Now, just as an example, looking at how countries in BRICS are performing in terms of artificial intelligence, you will see that some countries are already in the top 10 in various areas in terms of global ranking, all right? And others are in a lower double digits, which means there is already a very firm base for BRICS countries to move forward in terms of investment, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of human capital that it has as we speak, which means actually there is hope. We heard also this morning that just the sheer size of BRICS in terms of people, in terms of its capacity to do things, is huge and can really make an impact when it comes to matters of intelligence, artificial intelligence. Now, as I conclude, some of the things that we might want to consider moving forward, and some of them have already been covered. Non-traditional threats are currently and increasingly being weaponized, which means that BRICS will need to develop strategies on dealing with these non-traditional threats in a coordinated fashion. We have also heard that there is a need for alignment in terms of intra-BRICS policies and stance on a whole range of issues. I only highlighted 3, all right? The first one being the critical minerals for purposes of generating energy moving forward. Most of those happen to be resident within BRICS-controlled, BRICS-influenced regions. For example, in Africa, most of the minerals that we're going to need going forward are available in abundance in Africa, 60, 70% and above. In terms of investment and regulations on artificial intelligence, it is important that, as Professor Kai has indicated, that we need, as BRICS countries, to work together. You need to speak with one voice. Some of you might be aware that the EU has recently adopted an EU Act that governs the way of dealing with artificial intelligence going forward. In no time, those requirements are going to be imposed on I don't know if to say developing countries, but I think the safest is on the global majority. I think that is what one concept that was mentioned this morning. On the global majority. They'll be expected to comply with those. They'll be expected to incorporate those regulations into their national regulatory frameworks. The other thing to consider, when you look at the just transition on energy alone, most of the BRICS countries have their infrastructure is very young, 20 years or younger, or barely 20 years. And now, as we move into the new stage of renewable energies and all of those things, it means they have to do away with that infrastructure. And yet, as things stand, most of those countries have not sufficient electricity supply in some of their areas. Now, the next issue is about dealing with the proliferation of foreign military bases. Now, this might not be applicable in some regions, but guess what? In the case of Africa, we have evidence that this is wreaking havoc in many ways. In the sense that when these are introduced, they come with great and very noble intentions. In no time, they degenerate into something else. You might be aware of what is happening in West Africa, where some of these, the former colonial countries are being ejected. All right? They're being ejected. Not for what, but because the original arrangement was changed unilaterally and to the detriment of the host countries. The second last point, as part of considerations for the future, is that BRICS countries, and this has been said so many times today, will have to leverage their membership in strategic multilateral organizations, many of them, whether it is UN agencies, whether it is G20 and so on. They need to speak and sing from the same hymn sheet. It is very important because increasingly the voice of BRICS countries is going to make an impact in the new global order. Whether it is polycentric or multipolar, I don't know what Professor Dimitri is going to say, but it is going to be significant. Lastly, it is my proposition, or it is a shared proposition, that it is important for regional organizations where BRICS countries belong, all right, to be given some kind of a status within BRICS, all right, either as full members or some kind of observer status. Just like I think it was Prof. Dimitri who said something about the CSO. In our case in Africa, we speak of African Union. So those are very important for purposes of having a unified stance on many issues that are bedeviling the global politics as we speak today. That concludes my input, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Professor Kenil. I think you were absolutely right saying that nowadays we are living in the era when the new Cold War is emerging and the arms race and weaponization of global security threats can become a significant trigger for international system. And security threats, which you have mentioned, including water problem, food security, climate change, vaccines, and infectious disease. The main threat is that they will not only cause international cooperation, but also can become a matter of weaponization and usage of and usage of them in the confrontation between among major powers. And I think that BRICS activity here can bring positive examples of dialogue, cooperation, information exchange, and common efforts in different aspects. I'm very glad to give the floor to Professor Anatol Livin, who is very famous for many of his works on international relations and security. Please.
Thank you so much. I'd like to begin, of course, by thanking the BRICS Academic Forum for inviting me, and also extend my thanks to everyone who has organized this wonderful conference and to the hotel for looking after us. I also want to begin with an apology, perhaps not so much of an apology since others have also deviated from the subject. I wasn't going to talk about digital matters for the sake of my family, because I was afraid that if they heard that I'd been talking about digital issues, they'd all die laughing. My 12-year-old daughter is far better equipped to talk on these issues than I am, and indeed manages my information for me. So I will talk about the threat of terrorism and extremism more generally, and link it to two issues which have not been talked about here, but are of critical importance, I think, to many of the countries represented in BRICS. One of these is climate change, and the other is state failure and migration. Now, as the Crocus attacks here in Moscow so dreadfully reminded us, terrorism remains a critical threat. In the West, of course, it's seen above all as a threat to the West, naturally, but the great majority of countries represented here today have suffered from terrorism. And it is, of course, very well worth remembering that when it comes to Islamist terrorism, by far the largest number of victims have been in the Muslim world itself. They have been fellow Muslims, not others. Of course, there is also, as we have seen in several Western countries, but this is possible in many other countries as well, the threat of nativist extremism and terrorism, partly in response. Now, I am afraid that in future, these threats could get significantly worse. Due to two linked pressures in various critical parts of the world, and especially parts of the Muslim world. As I've said, climate change, and how climate change can can feed into other problems. Climate change has been called a force multiplier when it comes to both internal and international security threats, in a way that will drive state weakness towards state failure. And we can see this, and which in turn will both through the immiseration of populations help to drive radicalism and extremism, will provide havens, out of control areas for where terrorist groups can base themselves, and will of course drive migration into neighboring areas. And of course it's well worth remembering, once again this is something that is generally forgotten in the West, that the greatest impacts of migration are not in the West, great though those impacts are, they are in neighboring and nearby countries, and of course in the countries themselves that are affected. But certainly, I mean, already we see that the movements concerned are causing immense problems for a range of countries around the world. And also, I had some rather melancholy experiences here, I have to say, as a member of the Valdai Club here in Russia, where I tried to persuade other Western participants and the institutions they represented to have a serious and formalized discussion with Russia and indeed other countries about these issues of migration and the resulting problems of integration of migrant populations. And the general response, explicit or implicit, was, no, I mean, what on earth do we have to learn from them? Well, of course, if there's one thing which is blindingly clear, it is that none of us, no country in the world has come up with anything resembling a perfect solution to these issues, or a viable plan for the future, or at least a plan which can be guaranteed for the future. These are issues that I have been thinking about for many years, working in South Asia, and especially in Pakistan and Afghanistan. These countries, and then if you add Bangladesh from the point of view of climate change, are of course also of critical importance to India. And of course India itself is threatened by climate change, but India is bracketed by two of the countries which are most endangered by climate change, and most in danger of state failure for reasons which climate change is making much worse. Now, if you take Afghanistan, as the Crocus horror also reminded us, Afghanistan, as a failed state which has now been only partially restored under the Taliban, remains a very dangerous source of Islamist terrorism in the local form of ISK, the Islamic State of Khorasan. If you ask who the ISK are launching their jihad and their hatred against, well, I think a simple answer might be everybody. Certainly against the West, but also in the first instance Afghanistan's own government, despite the fact that it is an Islamist government, of course, the Taliban, and against Afghanistan's neighbors, Iran, where ISIS has carried out dreadful attacks, Pakistan, where it is actually largely composed of Pakistani Islamist migrants and is still doing its utmost to carry out a terrorist attack, a civil war in Pakistan, and of course would very much like to strike against India and China as well if it could get there, and of course presents an ongoing threat to the stability of Central Asia. ISK has been created by now more than 40 years of war and of resulting state failure and enduring state weakness. I think what Afghanistan also demonstrates is that I would imagine that a great many of us would have, shall we say, problems with the Taliban government of Afghanistan, or at the very least would probably not wish to live under it ourselves. But I think this leads us to a critical point, which is that the only governments, the only regimes, the only states which can control or limit terrorism and extremism in their countries are the governments of those states. The attempt to do it from outside and in the process to rule and radically change countries has failed totally on the part of the West, but an Indian general said to me a number of years ago when I asked him whether India was tempted to step into Afghanistan since the West was clearly failing, and he said, you know, I probably don't need to remind you as a British historian that for outside great powers to intervene in Afghanistan has not usually turned out well. And he said, I think my colleagues in India are very well aware of that. So, and what goes for Afghanistan goes for the rest of the world as well. Now, the United States has, of course, pulled back progressively from these efforts to rule and reshape other states in the Muslim world, but only in order to carry out something which, if not as catastrophic, is equally doomed, and also, of course, of extremely questionable morality, which is the attempt to control or limit terrorism through long-range missile attacks, drone attacks. Also a doomed strategy, as well as one which, of course, provides no hope whatsoever for the development of the societies concerned or the resolution of local conflicts. So we have to work through the states that we have got, though of course doing our utmost to help those states develop. And when I say that I fear that things could get much worse, well, one can point, of course, to parts of the Sahel in Africa, Western Africa. One can point to what is happening in Sudan today. And I think one phenomenon to be observed in the West, which of course none of the neighbors of these countries is likely to do, is that having failed in their, whatever you would call it, armed missionary attempts to turn some of these countries into Western-style democracies in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. This having failed completely, the response has simply been, since their formula doesn't work, the response has been simply to turn away, to rely on drones, but otherwise, to the utmost of their ability, actually to ignore what is going on in these countries, as one can see from the overwhelming neglect of the Sudanese civil war in the Western media. But this is not going to be possible in future, given the number of countries which are endangered by state weakness, and that combined with climate change. And here, a country that I know very well, which is threatened by these issues, is Pakistan, a country which already has 250 million people in it and is generally thought to be headed for 350 million people by the middle of this century. And when you think of 350 million in a failed state with nuclear weapons, I think that is enough to, and very serious internal threats from extremism and terrorism, I mean, that should be enough to, shall we say, concentrate our minds on the threats concerned. And it's not that Pakistan and many other states is in imminent danger of collapse. Once again, a lot of the analysis in the West has focused on the immediate threat of Islamist revolution. It's not going to happen soon. Pakistan does have very considerable sources of stability, as do other states. But as in some other states, those sources of stability are also sources of stagnation, of economic, political, social stagnation, which have proved now for more than half a century critical, indeed insurmountable obstacles to social and economic progress and change. And my impression of Pakistan today is of a country that is stuck. It's stuck. There is no force in Pakistan which is actually generating progress, which has a plan for progress, or I mean, there are, of course, proposals for reform, but those are proposals for reform that I heard when I first went to Pakistan almost 40 years ago now, and I'm still hearing them 40 years on, and still nothing has happened. Now, when I say that, my own country of Britain looks increasingly stuck as well. But of course, Britain has considerably more resources on which to draw before we collapse, and is also, of course, not remotely as threatened by climate change. Now, why is BRICS and the countries represented in BRICS better placed to address these issues than the West? Well, I would say for three reasons. One is that, of course, although America thinks that it neighbors on every country in the world, I was amused to read some American commentary on the Russian intervention in Syria, which said that, of course, Russia can't be seriously interested in or concerned with Syria because the Russian border is hundreds of miles from Syria. To which the response, of course, is that the American border is thousands of miles from the Middle East, and yet America, obviously regards itself as a Middle Eastern power and an East Asian power. And now, of course, it thinks of itself as an African power, but only in order to make sure that China, or try to make sure that China doesn't become an African power. And as well, of course, as the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America. But countries represented in BRICS actually do neighbor on these areas of profound concern from this combination of climate change, growing problems of agricultural production, population growth, state weakness, and all the things driving state weakness. The second point, I think, has been raised here in the form of pluralism, a recognition of the plurality of political systems and states. You could also, I suppose, call it realism, the fact that the world does and will always inevitably contain a range of different political systems which cannot and indeed should not be changed by diktat or decree by other state systems which know nothing of the societies concerned. As I remarked about Afghanistan, if you are trying to help various endangered states and societies around the world, you have to begin from the perspective of pluralism and realism towards the societies and systems concerned. And I think you can actually see that in Russia's role, beginning in many ways to eclipse that of France in Western Africa. And then, of course, there is also the fact that a number of leading countries in BRICS, as I remarked about India, are themselves acutely threatened by climate change, though not as badly as some of their neighbors. And perhaps also something that people are beginning to worry about in the West as a result of the growing political polarization and, yes, I mean, just stagnation of our political systems. But we forgot about completely for a long time. I mean, weirdly, since after all, 1930s and 40s are not that far in the past, but the fact that states can collapse. I think that so many countries in BRICS, as I myself, coming of East European origin, do have an innate sense that states are fragile things that must be, that can disappear and that must therefore be preserved, and have an awareness of the catastrophic consequences of states disappearing. The West, which I'm afraid continues to dominate the academic and intellectual debate on these things, which is why I'm so glad that the academic forum of BRICS exists in order to bring new perspectives, because, of course, it's not just Western academia itself, it's the way in which Western academia, through money and a form of cultural hegemony, has managed to, in many countries to a remarkable degree, distract local intellectuals from the realities of their own societies, something one has seen very much in Russia, or saw before in the 1990s. You did have a strong impression that a good many of the people discussing Russian politics in the future actually felt themselves to be based in Stockholm or London or New York, and had ceased really to be residents of this place at all in any real intellectual sense. Yes, that is really all I have to say. I wish I could offer some solutions to all this. Just one final thought, but with special reference to the Muslim world. In seeking to work with Muslim governments, and I should say I have talked of governments and states, but also with populations, of course, in the Muslim world. Because we have heard already this morning that democracy as viewed in the West is becoming a curious sort of thing, really, because it's a process that we approve of that involves perhaps some element of formal voting, and that leads to an outcome that we approve of. It doesn't necessarily by now have much to do with what the population of a country, or a majority there, actually thinks. But in dealing with the Muslim world, it is, of course, if you wish to gain any sympathy, real sympathy, meeting of minds, and frankly, if you wish not to help destroy the domestic prestige and stability of governments that you are dealing with, there is simply no alternative, which I'm happy to say sitting next to a South African colleague, of distancing yourself from Israel and its crimes. You cannot possibly develop a strategy for attempting to stabilize and support anti-extremist forces in the Muslim world while siding unconditionally with Israel and contributing to its crimes. That is a non-starter. When America will realize that, I do not know, but I congratulate anyone who is trying to help them remember it. So that's all I have to say. As I say, I wish I could offer solutions, but that will take a great deal of discussion and consultation by people around the world, and I hope that BRICS and its academic forum will play a leading role in these discussions. Thank you.
Professor Levin, thank you very much for bringing the issue of state into our discussion, and also we can find different aspects of this topic in a broader sense, because the threat of statelessness and state weakness is going together with examples also you have mentioned, when state is becoming the main source of threats and using international security issues for its own reasons. We are regularly in this country, we are regularly unfortunately seeing how the countries we are in conflict in, Ukraine is using drones and missiles for attacking civilian objects in Russian cities or former Ukrainian cities. And we can also bring a lot of examples in current world of contradictions, competition, and confrontation, when states are trying to use also gray zone methods, I can put it like this, to attack others and to confront with others, and to use these instruments for hybrid war and for political means. We have one more speaker today, Dr. Alexei Kupriyanov. Dr. Kupriyanov is heading Center for Indian Ocean Studies at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations of Russian Academy of Sciences. Please, the floor is yours. The region you are focused on is also surrounded by different threats, issues, and suffering from them dramatically. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Witalovsky, and thanks to all participants and all speakers for your brilliant presentations. I will be very brief. I will speak on digital terrorism, and I will speak in Russian, just not to let, well, our interpreters to get bored because of lack of work. Итак, я бы хотел на самом деле поговорить про терроризм на век цифровых технологий, именно про цифровой терроризм. И первое, что надо сделать, это определиться с дефинициями, потому что нам необходимо прежде всего отделить кибертерроризм от киберагрессии, наверное, и действий, поддержанных государством с одной стороны, и простых киберпреступлений с другой. Потому что есть разница между кибертерроризмом и киберагрессией. То есть мы понимаем под киберагрессией, можем предположить, что это действия, которые инспирированы и поддержаны государством и ставят целью вывод из строя неприятельской военной инфраструктуры, либо нанесение ущерба неприятельской военной инфраструктуре. Рука об руку с ней могут идти, например, спецоперации в киберсфере, которые ставят целью проникновения в информационные системы неприятеля и добычи оттуда разведывательной информации. При этом есть определенная серая зона между кибертерроризмом и киберагрессией, потому что чем мы будем считать, к примеру, удар по гражданской инфраструктуре, который либо приводит, либо не приводит к многочисленным гражданским жертвам и при всем при этом инспирирован и подготовлен государством. К примеру, представим себе, что у нас есть в качестве примера израильский вирус Stuxnet, который в свое время нацелен был на то, чтобы вывести из строя иранские атомные станции. Что произойдет в том случае, если, допустим, произойдет сама по себе система обеспечения атомной станции, будет выведена из строя и произойдет утечка ядерных материалов? В этом случае пострадают люди, которые живут вокруг. Что произойдет в том случае, если будут выведены из строя, к примеру, системы обеспечения в больнице? Что приведет к массовым жертвам? Что произойдет в случае, если будут выведены из строя какие-либо киберсистемы, которые обеспечивают функционирование, к примеру, химических предприятий? Это также приведет к массовым жертвам вокруг. Будет ли это считаться государственным терроризмом? На мой взгляд, да. К чему, например, будет ли считаться государственным терроризмом, если, к примеру, у нас просто временно происходит сбой в какой-либо системе типа наших госуслуг? Это не приводит к массовым человеческим жертвам, люди от этого прям физически не страдают, но при всем при этом растет некий уровень недовольства людей возможностью государства их защитить. Это уже спорный вопрос. Второе, что важно сделать, это отличить кибертерроризм от стандартных киберпреступлений, потому что есть обычные киберпреступления, которые совершаются с целью добычи денег, к примеру, с целью шантажа, и они не ставят целью непосредственно проведения террористических акций. Цель террористических акций – это либо дезинформация, либо запугивание населения другой страны для того, чтобы оно, либо людей, которые непосредственно влияют на лиц, принимающих решения, чтобы они, выказывая свое недовольство, склонили бы руководство страны к тем или иным конкретным действиям в интересах той группировки, которая осуществляет кибертеррористическую акцию. И я, как ни парадоксально, считаю, что именно на этом поле у стран БРИКС есть очень большой потенциал для совместной работы. Потому что у нас с 2016 года действует совместная антитеррористическая группа БРИКС, но вопросами кибертерроризма напрямую она до сих пор не занималась. У нас в 2020 году был принят на саммите в Уфе, была принята декларация антитеррористическая, но конкретно именно кибертерроризмом там, в принципе, ему уделено буквально пара строк. То есть там, насколько я помню, стороны обязуются совместно бороться с финансированием террористических группировок через сеть интернет и всячески взаимодействовать для того, чтобы не позволять распространять террористическую пропаганду. Я думаю, что этого мало и что необходимо расширить полномочия группы по борьбе с терроризмом и сделать особенный фокус на борьбе с кибертерроризмом. Причем мне кажется, что это довольно перспективное направление, прежде всего потому, что ни одна из стран БРИКС всерьез не заинтересована в том, чтобы с своей территории проводились кибертеррористические операции. Потому что, невзирая на все разногласия Китая и Индии, ни Пекин, ни Дели взаимно не заинтересованы в том, чтобы либо к северу, к югу от их границ возникла хаотичная зона в случае начала каких-либо крупных социальных волнений. Я полагаю, что именно вопрос кибертерроризма должен стать одним из ключевых на повестке российского председательства БРИКС. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. I think issues you have covered in your presentation are very significant, and also I'm very grateful for bringing our discussion into a very practical way. And during last decades, we have seen a lot of examples of usage of instruments of cyber aggression, and also many examples of cyber terrorism, and some of them are so interconnected and so close to each other that it is very hard to define what is cyber terrorism and what is cyber aggression. But anyway, we have to think about definitions together. We have to define in our common documents these issues. And I absolutely agree with you, we have to work a lot together. I mean, BRICS countries, but also other UN members who are interested in real cooperation on these issues to bring their agenda, to bring into the practical agenda methods and instruments of protection of cyber security and confronting to this to usage of these methods of cyber terrorism and cyber aggression also. Of course, all these issues are very interconnected with competition and confrontation in the cybersphere. All countries are facing right now in this more complicated and less secure world. And we need to find a way how we can define one from another and how we can manage with the rules of conduct for usage of cyber security offensive methods and what can be done and what cannot be done in terms of international regulation and international law. We have some time for asking our speakers questions from the audience. But before that, before the audience will start to ask questions, I have a question on which I would like to ask to answer each of our speakers very briefly, because it is significant to have a list. So, what threats you can describe as the most urgent and most dangerous in your understanding of new threats of international security, and in terms of cooperation, of the focus of cooperation among BRICS countries? Please, Dmitry Vitalyevich, let's start with you and then continue with other speakers. We have a mic here, so we can give a floor to each of you, please.
Well, thank you very much. I may disappoint you, but I would say that in today's environment, it's the old threats that are more dangerous than the present, than the new threats. In a way, we're back to history. We're back to a period that we thought was already safely put behind us. It's not. It's still with us, including nuclear threats. And I would want us to focus on that. And that, to me, is the most relevant, most serious threat that can wreak untold damage, if not cancel us all altogether.
Thank you. Professor Kanil.
Thank you, Program Director. I think my input has already been covered in my presentation when I highlighted the issue of artificial intelligence and its potential to either help or destroy the world as we know it. Simply because of the extent to which the major powers are exploiting this technology for military purposes, not just on land, not just at sea, not just in the air, but now increasingly taking it to space, which means it's going to be so disruptive that if it is not regulated, managed, toned down a bit, we might be going for a big challenge going forward. So that has to be done, to be dealt with on an urgent basis. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Professor Kamil. Professor Libin.
Well, as Dimitri said, in the short term and at present, the greatest threat is obviously war between great powers, leading to nuclear war. I would really like to see, in the case of Ukraine, India, for example, or Brazil, or both, playing a very important mediating role in the Ukrainian conflict. Of course, India as a neutral country, but which has very good relations with both Russia and with the United States, ought to be ideally placed to do that. But of course, to put it mildly, Washington has not encouraged anyone else to play a role in trying to bring this conflict to an end, and of course is itself simply on one side. But I think one of the tragedies of the present situation is if you look further ahead. You spoke, sir, of the threat of artificial intelligence, getting out of hand. And then, as I have already talked about, there is the evident threat of climate change. And I've often said and written that, from the perspective of 2024, if you look back 110 years to Europe in the spring of 1914, I do not think you would find many people today, or historians, who would say that any of the powers that went to war, the elites, the leaders who went to war in 1914, got it right. I mean, understood what they were getting themselves into, or the real threats to their societies, which turned out to be, above all, internal. I mean, internal threats liberated, encouraged, brought about by war, but in the end, internal threats of extremism, revolution, bitter internal civil war, and in some cases, of course, either state collapse or totalitarianism. I think if you try to look ahead 110 years from now, do we really think that in 134 CE, historians looking back are going to think, and with all deference, to Russia's, of course, immense concern in Ukraine? It does, after all, neighbor Ukraine and has deep stakes there. But I really do not think that 120 years from now, historians are going to think that the question of who ruled eastern Ukraine, or, if I may say so, who controlled some sandbanks and rocks in the South China Sea, that they will consider that these were really the most important issues facing humanity. I fear that they will look on us as we look back on our ancestors in 1914 and say, those people must have been mad.
Thank you, Professor Libin. Please, Professor Hiramat. The mic is coming.
Thank you so much. As I told in my presentation, at present, because most of the nations are highly dependent on technology, now it is a great threat to the even developing and developed countries. And there is, as for me, there is a need for common platform to overcome the cyber, severity of cyber threats, because all are highly depending on technologies, the AI or even digital digitalization is making us to highly depend on the technologies. So even I believe in there is a need to create awareness of to create about the cyber threat through organizing the regular seminars and forums are playing a very greater role, where the universities and educational institutions can include the young scholars, because they are the one who are the future of the world. We need to include them by creating awareness about the severity and threat of the cyber security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hiramat. Professor Said, please.
Thank you for the excellent question. I think it seems to me that gentlemen are more willing to focus on the traditional issues, and we ladies would like to focus on the digital and maybe soft side of the urgent issue among BRICS countries. I don't want to underscore the importance of traditional issues threatening the world peace right now, but I would like to say that I would like to mention that the digital security, cyber security, digital issues are probably the most urgent issues that we have to address especially among BRICS countries, because as I mentioned, this is the most feasible field that we can do right now. And also I think for the traditional issues, this is not a urgent issue that we can do among BRICS countries. And also for like nuclear issues, we have those deterrence systems, regulations already there. And then for ICT and digital, it is very important for the digital economy growth. And this is right now the most important maybe prospect for our future. And also, I also noticed that because this is, there's for cybercrime, for digital crime, there's the threshold for those cybercrime, digital crime are very low, and every actors, including countries, non-state actors, even individuals can do this. So I think that it's the most feasible and most important and urgent issue among BRICS countries that we can do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tsai. Dr. Kupriyanov, what is your vision?
Maybe we'll give some more times for people.
Good. So
for questions.
The list is rather sufficient, but to my mind, we can also bring a lot of issues, including food security, water problem, energy deficit, medical issues, and infectious disease, which also have been mentioned today at this session. Please, are there any questions from the audience who is ready to ask? Or we have covered the agenda so deeply that there are no questions. Okay, so I'm very grateful to all speakers. I think they tried to do their best and managed absolutely fantastic presentations and discussion. And I'm looking forward to new meetings with each of you and new discussions. And I think that, that the fact that our discussion have been so practically focused can give a hope and can give a background for further cooperation for BRICS countries and for academic communities of BRICS countries, but more than that, with engagement of experts from other countries into efforts of defining, understanding the nature of current international security threats, and also for cooperation to confront them and to find solutions for many of them. Thank you, and see you next time. Thank you very much.